Rain is supposed to be clear, water falling from clouds, nothing more. But what happens when the sky bleeds? When drops that should wash the earth clean instead stain everything they touch a deep, unsettling red? For the people of Kerala, India, this was not a question of philosophy, it was reality. And the explanation scientists eventually proposed was stranger than anyone could have imagined. The southern state of Kerala sits along India's southwestern coast. Lush green hills meet the Arabian Sea. Monsoons arrive like clockwork, bringing life to rice paddies and coconut groves. The people here know rain. They depend on it. They understand its rhythms. But in July 2001, the rain changed. It turned red. The first reports came from Kottayam district. Locals looked up at gathering clouds and noticed something wrong. The sky had taken on an odd hue. Then the rain began. It fell in crimson sheets. Within minutes, white clothing turned pink. Puddles looked like diluted blood. Children ran inside, frightened. Adults stood in doorways, staring up in confusion. This was not normal dust. Dust settles, dust washes away. This red substance clung to everything. It stained concrete. It colored wells. Some compared it to diluted wine. Others thought of blood. The rain continued for weeks, appearing sporadically across different parts of Kerala. Sometimes red, sometimes less intense. Always unsettling, residents of the affected areas described the experience in vivid detail. One farmer in Kottayam recalled how he was working in his rice paddy when the rain started. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. The drops hitting the water looked darker than they should. He held out his hand and watched as red droplets splattered across his palm. Within moments, his white shirt was covered in pink splotches. A school teacher in Idukki district remembered hanging laundry outside to dry. She had just finished pinning the last bedsheet when the clouds rolled in. She went inside for tea. When she returned 20 minutes later, her white linens had transformed into something resembling tie-dyed fabric. Every piece bore streaks and patterns of red. She had to wash everything 3 times before the color fully came out. The phenomenon was not constant. Some days brought normal rain, other days brought the red variety. There seemed to be no pattern. Meteorologists could not predict when the colored rain would fall. This randomness added to the public anxiety. People became wary of sudden downpours. They rushed to bring in laundry at the first sign of clouds. Children were kept indoors during rainstorms. Local newspapers began documenting each occurrence. Journalists kept maps marking where the red rain fell. The pattern was bizarre. One neighborhood might be drenched while an adjacent street remained dry. Sometimes, the red rain fell in narrow bands, as if following an invisible path through the landscape. This selective targeting defied conventional meteorological explanation. Religious leaders offered various interpretations. Hindu priests suggested it might be a manifestation of divine will. Christian clergy referenced biblical accounts of blood raining from the heavens as signs of judgment. Muslim imams called for prayer and reflection. The phenomenon became not just a scientific curiosity, but a spiritual event that touched the lives of millions. Tourism to Kerala dropped sharply during the summer of 2001. Visitors cancelled reservations. Hotels reported significant losses. The region's famous backwaters and hill stations saw fewer travelers. International media coverage, while bringing attention, also sparked fear. Images of red-stained buildings and crimson puddles looked apocalyptic. The economic impact was substantial. Godfrey Louis was a physicist at Mahatma Gandhi University in Kottayam. He heard the reports. He saw the stains on buildings near his campus. Louis was a scientist, trained to question. He decided to collect samples. He set out containers to catch the rain. He scraped residue from rooftops. He wanted answers. Louis's initial investigation began with simple observation. He placed sterile collection vessels on the roof of the physics building. He waited. When the next red rain came, He rushed to secure the samples. The water in his containers looked like diluted raspberry juice. He held one up to the light. The liquid was translucent but distinctly colored. Particles floated throughout, catching the sunlight. He enlisted help from his students. Together, they established a collection network across Kottayam district. Volunteers placed containers at designated locations. When red rain fell, they preserved samples according to Louis's protocol. This systematic approach yielded dozens of samples from different locations and different rain events. The consistency across samples was striking. When Louis examined the samples under a microscope, he found particles, tiny cells, roughly 4 to 10 micrometers in diameter. They had thick walls. They appeared biological, but they were strange. Louis ran tests. The cells seemed to lack DNA. At least, standard tests for DNA came back negative. This was peculiar. Every living organism on Earth contains DNA or RNA. These cells appeared to have neither. The cells had other unusual properties. They were remarkably uniform in size and shape. Most biological samples show variation. These did not. They appeared almost manufactured in their consistency. Their thick cell walls resisted penetration by standard biological stains. Techniques that worked on bacteria and algae failed on these cells. They simply would not take up the dye. Louis attempted various chemical treatments. He exposed the cells to acids. He tried alkaline solutions. He subjected them to enzymes that normally break down organic material. The cells remained intact. Their walls seemed impervious to chemical attack. This was highly unusual. Terrestrial cells, even those with protective structures, typically respond to at least some chemical treatments. Then Louis tried heating the samples. He expected the cells to rupture or decompose at high temperatures. Instead, they survived. He heated them to 100 degrees Celsius. They remained unchanged. He increased the temperature to 200 degrees. Still no change. At 300 degrees Celsius, the cells showed no signs of damage. This was extraordinary. Few biological structures can withstand such extreme heat. Louis documented everything meticulously. He took hundreds of photographs through the microscope. He recorded exact procedures for each experiment. He measured cell dimensions with precision. His laboratory notebooks filled with data. He wanted his work to be beyond reproach. He knew that what he was about to propose would face intense scrutiny. Louis proposed something radical. What if these cells were not from Earth? What if they had fallen from space? The theory seemed absurd at first, but Louis pointed to meteor reports. Witnesses across Kerala had reported a loud sonic boom on the 25th of July, shortly before the red rains intensified. Could a meteor have exploded in the atmosphere, releasing biological material? Could those cells have rained down onto Kerala? The meteor sighting added a crucial piece to the puzzle. Multiple witnesses described hearing an explosion in the sky. Some reported seeing a bright streak of light, followed by a loud bang. The timing was significant. The first intense red rains began within hours of these reports. Louis believed this was not coincidence. Perhaps a space rock had carried microscopic passengers. Louis interviewed witnesses who had seen the meteor. A bus driver described pulling over because the flash was so bright it temporarily blinded him. A fisherman returning to shore reported seeing an object streak across the sky before disappearing behind the mountains. Children playing cricket stopped their game to watch the spectacle. The accounts were consistent. Something had entered the atmosphere. The Indian government launched an investigation. Officials wanted to calm public fears. The most obvious explanation was dust. Perhaps strong winds had lifted red soil particles from the Arabian Peninsula or North Africa. These particles could have been carried across the Arabian Sea and deposited over Kerala by monsoon clouds. This happened occasionally in other parts of the world. Government scientists collected their own samples. They conducted standard mineralogical tests. They found traces of silicon and aluminum, elements common in soil. They also detected iron oxide, which could explain the red color. Based on these findings, they issued a preliminary report. The red rain was likely caused by dust from desert regions mixing with monsoon clouds. Case closed. The government report brought temporary relief to the public. Officials held press conferences. Ministers assured citizens there was no health risk. Life slowly returned to normal. But some scientists were not satisfied. The explanation seemed too simple. It did not account for all the observations. But Louis argued against this. He noted that the red rain fell in localized areas. Sometimes one village would be drenched in red, while neighboring villages received normal rain. Dust storms typically affect broader regions. The pattern did not fit. Louis also pointed out that the particles he found were cellular in structure. Dust particles are irregular mineral fragments. These were not. He conducted experiments to test the dust hypothesis directly. He obtained samples of red desert soil from various regions. He mixed this soil with water to create artificial red rain. Under the microscope, these samples looked nothing like the Kerala rain. The desert soil produced angular particles with irregular edges. The Kerala samples showed smooth, rounded cells with defined walls. The difference was obvious. Louis also questioned the localization pattern. If winds had carried dust from Africa or Arabia, why did the red rain only fall in specific spots? Weather systems move across regions. They do not target individual villages while skipping others nearby. The selective nature of the phenomenon suggested something other than simple dust transport. He published a detailed analysis of wind patterns during the period. Prevailing winds had been blowing from the west, as expected during monsoon season. But atmospheric models showed no evidence of large dust plumes crossing the Arabian Sea at the relevant times. Satellite imagery confirmed this. The dust hypothesis lacked meteorological support. The controversy deepened. Some scientists supported the dust theory. They conducted their own tests and claimed to find evidence of terrestrial minerals in the samples. Others remained skeptical. The cells Louis described were unusual. They resisted standard biological staining techniques. They could apparently survive extreme temperatures. When heated to 300 degrees Celsius, they did not decompose. Normal biological cells would have been destroyed. Louis published his findings in academic journals. He suggested the cells might be extraterrestrial microorganisms. Perhaps they had survived in the harsh conditions of space, protected by their thick cell walls. Perhaps they had traveled through the solar system, embedded in comets or asteroids, until finally entering Earth's atmosphere over Kerala. His papers attracted immediate attention. Some praised his boldness in proposing such an unconventional hypothesis. Others criticized him for jumping to conclusions without sufficient evidence. The scientific community became divided. Conferences featured heated debates. Journal editors received submissions from both sides. The Kerala red rain became one of the most controversial topics in biology and astrobiology. The idea was not entirely new. A theory called panspermia had existed for decades. It proposed that life could travel between planets or even between star systems. Simple organisms might hitch rides on space debris. When that debris entered a planet's atmosphere, the organisms could be deposited. Earth might have been seeded with life this way billions of years ago. Some scientists found the theory plausible. Others dismissed it as speculation. Panspermia had famous proponents. Nobel laureate Francis Crick, who helped discover the structure of DNA, had written about the possibility of directed panspermia. He suggested that advanced civilizations might deliberately seed planets with life. Astronomer Fred Hoyle had championed the idea that comets carry organic material and even living organisms throughout space. These were respected scientists, lending credibility to a once fringe theory. Hoyle had even proposed that some disease outbreaks on Earth resulted from pathogens falling from space. He linked influenza epidemics to cosmic sources. Most scientists rejected these ideas. But Hoyle's mathematical work on stellar nucleosynthesis had earned him a knighthood. His unconventional biological theories could not be dismissed lightly simply because of who he was. Kerala's red rain became a test case. If Louis was correct, the cells falling from the sky represented the first confirmed instance of extraterrestrial life. The implications were staggering. It would mean life existed elsewhere in the universe. It would mean Earth was not unique. It would fundamentally change how humanity understood its place in the cosmos. The philosophical implications ran deep. If life could survive interplanetary transfer, then perhaps life was common throughout the universe. Perhaps every rocky planet harbored organisms. Perhaps the galaxy teemed with biology. This would reshape astronomy, biology, and philosophy simultaneously. The stakes could not have been higher, but extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Critics pointed out flaws in Louis's research. The lack of DNA was suspicious. How could cells function without genetic material? Louis suggested the cells might use an alternative system. Perhaps they stored information differently. Perhaps their biology was fundamentally alien. But this was speculation without proof. Some scientists proposed that the cells might use a different genetic system entirely. RNA-based life, for instance, could theoretically exist, or perhaps these organisms encoded information in proteins rather than nucleic acids. Such systems would be undetectable by standard DNA tests. This would explain Louis's negative results while still allowing for biological function. Other researchers attempted to replicate Louis's findings. Some confirmed the presence of unusual cells in the samples. Others found only mineral particles and terrestrial biological material. The debate grew heated. Academic papers were published supporting both sides. Conferences were held. Media outlets picked up the story. Kerala's red rain became international news. A team from Sheffield University in England became involved. They requested samples from Louis. They had access to advanced analytical equipment. Their initial results were intriguing. They confirmed the presence of cellular structures. They found organic compounds, but they could not definitively determine whether the cells were terrestrial or extraterrestrial. The Sheffield team used spectroscopy to analyze the chemical composition of the cells. They found carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen in ratios consistent with organic material. But these elements are common to all life, terrestrial or otherwise. The analysis could not distinguish origin. More sophisticated tests would be needed. Meanwhile, the rain itself stopped. By September 2001, the phenomenon had ended. The skies over Kerala returned to normal. Monsoons came and went in the years that followed, but the rain remained clear. Whatever had caused the red coloration seemed to be a temporary event. This only added to the mystery. The temporary nature of the phenomenon puzzled researchers. If the source was terrestrial dust or algae blooms, why did it not recur? Kerala's climate had not changed. The monsoon patterns remained consistent, yet the red rain never returned with the same intensity. This suggested a one-time event. Something unusual had happened in 2001 and then ceased. Louis continued his research. He obtained more samples from people who had stored the red rainwater in bottles. He conducted further experiments. He claimed the cells could reproduce when placed in extreme heat, around 121 degrees Celsius. This was extraordinary. Normal cells would die at such temperatures. Louis argued this proved the cells were adapted to extreme environments, possibly space. The reproduction experiments became central to Louis's argument. He claimed that when heated to 121 degrees in growth medium, the cells began to multiply. He documented this with microscope photographs showing increasing cell counts over time. If true, this was remarkable. It suggested organisms that thrived in conditions lethal to terrestrial life. Louis proposed that the cells might be thermophilic extremophiles from space. Perhaps they evolved near hydrothermal vents on an alien world, or perhaps they adapted to the extreme temperatures of atmospheric entry. Their heat resistance could be an evolutionary adaptation to interplanetary travel, but reproducibility remained a problem. Other scientists could not confirm Louis's results. When they heated the red rain samples, they saw no reproduction. They questioned his methodology. Had he contaminated the samples? Were the results artifacts of the experimental setup? Louis defended his work. He insisted his procedures were sound. The failure to replicate became a major issue. In science, findings must be independently verifiable. Other researchers using the same methods should get the same results. When they do not, it raises questions about the original work. Critics argued that Louis's failure to provide reproducible evidence undermined his entire hypothesis. Louis suggested that sample degradation might explain the replication failures. His original samples, collected fresh in 2001, behaved differently than samples stored for years. Perhaps the cells lost viability over time. Perhaps storage conditions affected their properties. This was plausible but difficult to verify. The controversy attracted attention from astrobiologists. These scientists study the possibility of life beyond Earth. They examine extreme environments where life might exist. They consider how organisms could survive the journey through space. Kerala's red rain seemed relevant to their work. If the cells were truly extraterrestrial, it would support theories about how life spreads through the cosmos. Some astrobiologists visited Kerala. They collected their own samples. They interviewed witnesses. They reviewed meteor reports from July 2001. The sonic boom Louis mentioned was real. Multiple people had heard it. Some described a bright flash in the sky, but did this prove a meteor had exploded? Could it have released biological material? The evidence remained circumstantial. Researchers examined atmospheric data from the time. Satellite images showed no obvious meteor trail. Radar installations detected no incoming objects. If a large meteor had entered the atmosphere, it should have left traces. The absence of such evidence complicated Louis's theory. Perhaps the meteor was smaller than expected, or perhaps there was no meteor at all. Some researchers suggested the sonic boom might have been unrelated to the red rain. Aircraft breaking the sound barrier can produce similar sounds. Military exercises occasionally generate such noises. The temporal correlation might be coincidental rather than causal. This possibility weakened the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Alternative explanations emerged. One theory suggested the cells were actually spores from terrestrial algae. Certain algae produce thick-walled spores that can survive harsh conditions. Perhaps a bloom of these algae had occurred in a nearby body of water. Strong winds could have lifted the spores into the atmosphere. When rain fell, the spores would have been carried down, giving the water its red color. This seemed plausible. Algae blooms happen. Spores can be transported by wind. The red coloration fit. But Louis countered that the cells he found did not match known algae species. He had compared them to extensive databases. No terrestrial organism matched the characteristics he observed. The cells were unique. Some researchers suggested specific candidates. Trentipolia, a red alga that grows on rocks and tree bark, was proposed. This organism produces red pigments and forms spores. It grows in tropical regions, including India. Could wind-blown Trentipolia spores explain the red rain? Louis examined this possibility. He obtained Trentipolia samples and compared them to his red rain cells. They were different. The shapes did not match. The size distributions did not match. Years passed. The debate continued. No consensus emerged. Mainstream scientists leaned toward the terrestrial explanation. The cells were likely algae spores or fungal spores mixed with mineral dust. The unusual properties Louis reported could be explained by experimental errors or misinterpretation. The red rain was strange but not alien. Yet a minority of researchers maintained that the extraterrestrial hypothesis should not be dismissed. They pointed out that science had been wrong before. Meteorites were once thought to be impossible. Scientists insisted rocks could not fall from the sky. Then evidence accumulated. the scientific consensus changed. Perhaps the same would happen with Kerala's red rain. Historical precedents existed for scientific paradigm shifts. Continental drift was ridiculed when first proposed. The bacterial origin of ulcers was dismissed for decades. Helicobacter pylori was eventually recognized, earning its discoverers a Nobel Prize. The lesson was clear. Unconventional ideas sometimes prove correct, but they require solid evidence. Did Louis have that evidence? Louis grew frustrated. He felt the scientific community was ignoring compelling evidence because the implications were too radical. He argued that bias against the extraterrestrial hypothesis prevented fair evaluation. Critics responded that extraordinary claims needed extraordinary proof. Unusual cells were not enough. Without definitive evidence of non-terrestrial origin, the default assumption had to be that the cells came from Earth. The story might have ended there, but in 2006, Louis published another paper. He claimed to have found new evidence. When examined with advanced electron microscopy, the cells appeared to have internal structures. These structures resembled organelles found in terrestrial cells, but were organized differently. Louis suggested this supported the alien hypothesis. The cells had biology, just not Earth biology. The electron microscopy images showed what appeared to be internal compartments. Some looked like possible nucleus analogues, others resembled mitochondria or chloroplasts, but the arrangement was wrong. Terrestrial cells organize their internal structures in predictable ways. These cells did not follow those patterns. To Louis, this indicated a fundamentally different form of cellular organization. Again, other scientists were skeptical. The structures Louis identified could be artifacts of the imaging process. Electron microscopy can create false features if samples are not prepared correctly. Without independent confirmation, the findings remained disputed. Then, in 2013, a team of British and Indian scientists published a study. They had obtained samples of the red rain. They conducted extensive analysis. Their conclusion was definitive. The cells were spores from a terrestrial green alga. Specifically, they matched spores from algae commonly found in Kerala's freshwater environments. The mystery, they declared, was solved. The 2013 paper used DNA sequencing technology that had not been available in 2001. The researchers extracted genetic material from the cells and sequenced it. The results matched sequences from known terrestrial algae. The organisms belonged to the genus Trentipolia, just as some had suspected. This seemed to settle the question definitively. The research team published their genetic sequences in public databases. Other scientists could verify the results. The DNA clearly matched terrestrial organisms. The evidence appeared conclusive. Major scientific journals reported the findings. Headlines declared the mystery solved. Extraterrestrial life had not fallen on Kerala after all. But Louis rejected this conclusion. He argued the British team had analyzed contaminated samples. Over the years since 2001, many samples had been stored improperly. Terrestrial organisms could have colonized the stored rainwater. The presence of algae spores in 2013 samples did not prove those spores caused the original red rain. Louis insisted his early samples, collected in 2001, showed different characteristics. The debate reached an impasse. Each side accused the other of poor methodology. Each side believed their evidence was conclusive. The scientific process, usually effective at resolving disputes, seemed unable to settle this one. Kerala's red rain remained contested. For the people of Kerala, the scientific arguments were abstract. What mattered was the experience. They had seen red rain. They had felt it on their skin. They had watched it stain their homes. Whether the cells were from Earth or space, the phenomenon had been real and deeply unsettling. Some locals developed their own theories. Perhaps the rain was a sign. Perhaps it carried meaning. Religious interpretations spread. Some saw it as a warning. Others viewed it as a miracle. The scientific debate seemed distant from these personal responses. People made sense of the event in their own ways. Interestingly, Kerala was not the only place where red rain had fallen. Historical records documented similar events in other locations. In 2012, red rain fell in Sri Lanka, just across the water from Kerala. Samples from that event also showed unusual cells. Louis argued this supported the extraterrestrial hypothesis. If the same cells appeared in different locations at different times, they were unlikely to be local algae. The Sri Lankan event renewed interest in the phenomenon. Researchers there collected samples and conducted their own analyses. Some found similarities to the Kerala samples, others did not. The pattern repeated. Conflicting results, disputed interpretations, no clear answers. Europe had its own history with colored rain. In the 1800s, red rain fell occasionally over parts of France and Italy. Scientists at the time attributed it to dust from the Sahara Desert. Chemical analysis confirmed iron oxide particles consistent with desert soil. The European red rains were terrestrial. But did that mean all red rains had the same cause? Louis thought not. The core question remained, what were the cells in Kerala's red rain? If they were terrestrial, which species did they belong to? If they were extraterrestrial, how did they get there? Both explanations faced challenges. The terrestrial theory struggled to explain the cells' unusual resistance to heat and their apparent lack of DNA. The extraterrestrial theory struggled to provide definitive proof of non-Earth origin. Louis pointed to one more piece of evidence. The cells could be cultured. When placed in certain growth media, they multiplied, but they did so in odd ways. Standard culture techniques for algae did not work well. The cells required specific conditions. Louis argued this suggested they were adapted to environments unlike Earth's surface. Perhaps they evolved in space, where conditions were radically different. Critics remained unconvinced. Culturing difficulties could simply mean the cells were a poorly understood terrestrial species. Many organisms have specific growth requirements. Unusual does not mean alien. The burden of proof rested with Louis. He needed to show something that could only be explained by an extraterrestrial origin. He had not done that. As the years went by, interest in Kerala's red rain faded. The media moved on. Scientists turned to other questions. Louis continued his research but struggled to gain funding. His academic career suffered. He became known as the scientist who believed in alien rain. Some viewed him as a visionary. Others saw him as misguided. But the mystery lingered. Stored in bottles across Kerala were samples of the red rain. They sat in homes and laboratories. They could still be tested. New technologies emerged. DNA sequencing became cheaper and more sensitive. Perhaps one day, someone would conclusively identify the cells. Perhaps the truth would finally emerge. Or perhaps not. Some mysteries resist resolution. The evidence points in multiple directions. Interpretation depends on assumptions. Do we assume life is rare, making extraterrestrial cells unlikely? Or do we assume the universe is full of life, making such cells plausible? Science strives for objectivity, but scientists are human. They bring biases. Kerala's red rain forces uncomfortable questions. How do we recognize alien life if we find it? If the cells are extraterrestrial, they represent a form of life that evolved independently. They might not use DNA. They might function by entirely different principles. Our tests are designed to detect Earth life. Could we be missing something fundamental? Astrobiologists wrestle with this problem. They try to imagine what alien biochemistry might look like. They consider alternatives to DNA. Silicon-based life, organisms that use ammonia instead of water, entities that exist in extreme temperatures or pressures. The possibilities are vast. If life is out there, it might be unrecognizable. Perhaps that is what happened in Kerala. Perhaps alien cells rained down and scientists could not recognize them for what they were. The cells looked strange, but not strange enough. They had features that resembled terrestrial life and features that did not. Caught between the familiar and the unknown, researchers defaulted to the familiar: algae spores, dust, terrestrial explanations. Or perhaps the terrestrial explanation is correct. Perhaps the cells are just unusual algae. Perhaps their resistance to heat has a mundane explanation. Perhaps the lack of DNA in early tests was a technical error. Perhaps Kerala's red rain is a fascinating but ultimately earthbound phenomenon. The truth is, we do not know. Decades after the red rain fell, the answer remains elusive. Samples exist, data exists, but clarity does not. This is unsettling for those who expect science to provide definitive answers. Sometimes it cannot. Sometimes the evidence is too ambiguous, the questions too complex. What we can say is this: in 2001, red rain fell over Kerala. It contained microscopic cells with unusual properties. Those cells have been studied extensively. Different researchers have reached different conclusions. The debate continues. The mystery endures. For Godfrey Louis, the fight goes on. He remains convinced the cells are extraterrestrial. He continues to publish papers, attend conferences, present evidence. He hopes that eventually the scientific community will take his claims seriously. He dreams of the day when the red rain is recognized as humanity's first contact with alien life. For his critics, the case is closed. The cells are terrestrial. The initial anomalies were experimental artifacts. Kerala's red rain is interesting but explained. No further investigation is needed. The extraterrestrial hypothesis is pseudoscience. Between these positions lies uncertainty. Most scientists remain agnostic. The evidence is insufficient to conclude definitively either way. More research could help. But funding is limited. Interest has waned. Kerala's red rain slips toward obscurity. Yet the rain itself was real. Thousands of people witnessed it. They collected it. They were affected by it. Their experiences cannot be dismissed. Something unusual happened in Kerala in 2001. Whether that something was alien or merely strange, it deserves attention. The sky bled over Kerala. The rain ran red, and in those drops, suspended between explanation and mystery, might lie answers to questions humanity has asked for millennia. Are we alone? Has life from elsewhere touched Earth? Could simple cells carried on cosmic winds seed planets across the galaxy? We do not know. Perhaps we never will. But the red rain reminds us that the universe holds secrets. Not all of them yield easily. Some resist even our best efforts to understand. And in that resistance, in that stubborn mystery, lies a kind of wonder. The cells remain, locked in bottles, stored in laboratories, waiting. Perhaps one day, technology will advance enough to reveal their origin. Perhaps a definitive test will prove them alien or terrestrial. Or perhaps they will remain forever ambiguous, a puzzle with missing pieces, a question without a clear answer. That is the nature of some mysteries. They do not resolve, they simply persist. And we are left to wonder, to speculate, to imagine. Kerala's red rain invites us to look up at the sky and ask what else might fall from it. What other strange phenomena might we witness? What other inexplicable events await? Rain should be clear, water should be transparent, but sometimes it is not. Sometimes the sky bleeds, and when it does, we are reminded of how little we truly understand, how vast the unknown remains, how much still lies beyond our grasp. If you found this story intriguing, share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you heard of similar phenomena? What do you think caused Kerala's red rain? And if you want to explore more unexplained mysteries, subscribe and turn on notifications. More stories are coming.